Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the pool area here. So, yeah, very nice. Seems like it's been hot lately, so we're going to come inside. And we were in Colorado last week, so coming home I thought, well, we went to a place that had cowboy music, and I said, well, I'll do some cowboy songs, and kind of put together a set list, and then kind of moved inside, and Marcia said, well, they'll want to hear the organ. And I said, well, I don't know, but then I got to thinking that you all may not have been up close and personal with a B3 organ before. And it's such an iconic sound that I thought I would kind of tell you why it's the king of the musical instruments, in my opinion anyway. So, I'm going to introduce you to the B3 organ.
Hello, B3.
Hello? Say hello to the B3. So the B3 organ is classic for kind of a classic sound for jazz and rock and roll, and it has a long history. I'm going to start with a little bit about the organ. This is the startup process. It's like a diesel engine. It has a starter motor, and then it has to get cranked up here. There we go. So, this organ was invented in 1935, this type of organ, by a man named Hammond, Leonard Hammond, and he was from the Midwest and in the Chicago area, and he made a fair amount of money building clocks, wind-up clocks and other kinds of clocks, and then he thought he probably had all the clocks that needed to be sold figured out, and he invented, which was interesting for us to find out now, I just learned this recently, another one of his inventions was an automatic bridge card dealing table. And I think I saw one on probably American Pickers or something. But it's like a card table, and underneath has these wheels and arms, and you put a stack of deck, and they swings around under the table, and it deals the cards out, and the cards come up automatically, and you have a hand, so you don't have to shuffle or you don't have to deal. And he did that in the early 30s, and I think he probably figured he sold all of those he could ever sell, pretty much. And then, being around his clocks, he heard this mechanical sound of the clocks running. And he thought back to an instrument that someone invented in 1890 as a thermophile or something, I don't know what the name of the instrument was, but it used spinning wheels in a magnetic field to generate an electrical signal that came out as a tone. And this particular instrument took a lot of room to make enough signal to hear the sound. And the instrument was put into 3 boxcars. That's how big this was. So our inventor, Mr. Hammond, figured out that he could make a small wheel, and he could take the signal that came out and run it through an amplifier, and then make an electronic organ. So that was his invention. was to use a tone wheel, a metal wheel that just spins in an electrical field and then somehow generates a signal that comes out as sound. And he patented this in 1935, and his intention at the time was to build an organ that would simulate a pipe organ for churches. And his organ cost at that time $2,500, and he was trying to make it sound like a $10,000 pipe organ. So he started this company, and he sold a lot of organs to churches. He was sued by the pipe organ people who didn't like his advertising that said it was as good as a pipe organ. And the court sent him to court and had testing, blind testing of the sounds. They used a $75,000 pipe organ, and they used his Hammond organ, and they had judges, professionals, and amateur people listen to it to see if they could tell the difference. He lost that suit and couldn't say it was exactly equivalent to a pipe organ, but he got so much advertising out of that lawsuit that it really kicked his company up a notch. And so those organs were really, in 35, looked exactly like the two keyboards that I have here and the drawbars. At the time, they had a box that was filled in all the way down to the ground so that the lady organists could play without showing too much of themselves. And then in the 50s, the jazz players started playing the Hammond organ. It started with Jimmy Smith. He was a wonderful, wonderful musician who just changed the way this organ was used and sound. And what happened to the musicians in my generation was that whole bands got replaced by a DJ. And at that time, a 20-piece band started to be replaced by an organ trio. Classic organ trio was drums and a guitar and an organ, and the organ player played the bass parts and the other, and a club owner could pay them less than a 20-piece band and could have room for 10 more tables. So that was bad news for big bands in the early 50s. And then it became a rock and roll instrument. Not too long after that early 60s and the classic sounds of rock and roll. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. When I was 8 years old, it would be 1959, the biggest thing in music was home spinnered organs. Did anybody have a home spinnered organ? A little small keyboard of an organ? Well, we had one in our house, and my dad looked for different kind of organs, had several in the house for a while, and he was a clarinet player, and what he wanted was one that the flute sounded like a flute, and the trumpet sounded like a trumpet, and everything sounded the right. And so this is what is supposed to sound like a clarinet, which may or may not. So we didn't get a Hammond organ because it doesn't sound enough like a clarinet to my dad. And then my mother started taking lessons, and they started me on lessons when I was 8 years old. And the way that they would teach people to play, they would teach you the pointer system, where you point your finger on the note and you play 2 above and 3 below, and that makes a chord, and then you make that chord and play. So that was the way that my mother learned to play. just played a few hymns and a few other things. And I took lessons to play from the time I was 8 till I was 11, and then we moved, and it was a great studio where I was at. And then in spring of 8th grade, my friends started playing in a rock and roll band. So I talked my dad into getting a little combo organ, and I started playing rock and roll with those. And my first introduction to the Hammond organ was I think probably from the Young Rascals. You remember the Young Rascals, and they would play it. When I was sophomore in high school, we went from Des Moines to Kansas City to look at organs because they had lots of music stores. And I took that record of the Rascals with me, and I had a little portable record player, and I went in and said, I want this sound. I didn't know what it was. That was the sound I heard on the record. And the song that I always kind of played was turns out to be a jazz standard, who knew? Since I Fell for You, and it was. And I bought this little Fender combo organ with a small Leslie speaker, and it had close to that sound for being able to carry around. And so that was really my rock and roll instrument of choice. And when I was 15, then I was playing 3 nights a week in a rock and roll band, and I wanted to go back and take lessons. And I took lessons from a school teacher who played in a smoky lounge on the weekends and taught music lessons in the afternoons. So he played. My dad was a musician. His idea of a musician was that you would be able to put him in a chair, put a music stand there, take any piece of music in front of it, and he could play it exactly as it was written. That was his ideal of a musician. Every time played just perfectly. And of course, I'm playing rock and roll, and I'm taking lessons from a guy who's teaching you to play the same song all night long and never play it the same way twice. So we had discussions, but so kind of at that time, my mother's hope was someday I'd grow up and play in church, and my hope was to grow up and play in bars, and it turned out neither one of us got exactly what we wanted, but it's close. At our old parish, I used to go on Lenten dinners and play lounge music for the fish fries on Lenten Fridays. So I was playing music in church, but I was playing bar music in church. But we get what you pay for, I guess. So. But he was teaching me to play. And that's a lot of what I play when I play with the jazz group here in Crestman. We kind of have a chart, you have one melody note and some suggestions for a chord, and then you just make up the rest. So I play that a lot. Just before I finished high school, I took some lessons from a fellow who played jazz, who played Jimmy Smith style of jazz, and kind of got to figure out something about the organ from playing lessons with him, because it's not a usual beast. And he would play, sort of start out with it. So they would play real fast parts, and I took about a month's worth of lessons from him, and then I had to decide whether I was going to go to college and pursue education. That week I was leaving, I got a call from my favorite rock and roll band who played 5 or 6 states around and wanted me to play, and I said, I think I have to go to college. So I just really, that was one of those life points where I could have gone 5 or 6 years probably and had a different experience. But so then I went to school, and kind of 4 years of college, I didn't really play, came back in the summers and played a little bit. But I was 9th grade when I started playing out on a regular basis. and because I played organ and I had an organ, I played up. So the guys I was playing with were 17 or 18 years old. They all drove. We traveled all through the state of Iowa. We were in the 2007 inducted into the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and yeah, it was quite a deal. And then they all went to the service. I went to college, and there's 4 years I had no idea what the music was going on. I didn't listen to any, and I didn't play any. I'd come home and play with them in the summers a little bit, but they were all playing in bars at that time, and I was too young to play with them. So I had to either sneak in, which was uncomfortable, or wait till I got to be 21. And then I came back to my hometown to go to medical school, and they were playing in a bar there. They played 5 nights a week. There was, Tuesday was, they played as a trio and played country music. And Wednesday was ladies' night, and they played top 40. And Thursdays was 50s nights. And then on Friday and Saturday, the weatherman and his wife on TV would come out and play with them. So for the first 9 months of medical school, I would go out on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and I took my organ out there and left it, and I would walk in at 9:25, and we would play until 12:30, and then I'd come home and study. But I didn't have to rehearse. They would teach me the songs between sets, and the 50s nights, they were all the same anyway. But that was good for me because I need to be a little bit of a star. And it was hard being a freshman in medical school, shining in that group. They were pretty big.
Is that true?
So then I went to Detroit, and I had visions of taking my organ. I started playing bluegrass music then. My last 2 years of medical school with some guys, we kind of dropped down and just had a little local group that was fun. And I thought, well, when I go to Detroit, I'll take my organ up there and I'll actually learn to play some real jazz music, because it's kind of a classic place to do that. Moved to Detroit. Turned out there were, I don't know, 60 or 70 people within 5 miles of the hospital that played bluegrass music. They had all moved up during the 50s from Kentucky and West Virginia and Tennessee, and they just welcomed you into their house. They fed you. They'd play with their children. They played music, and every time I would walk in, they would ask if I delivered any babies, and I'd say no, and that was the last medical question. That was the only thing they were sort of interested in, and it was really nice to be able to leave that, being a student and an intern, and just go someplace and be kind of a star, because you're never much of a star when you're an intern either. I tell you, that was a hard year. And so I sent my organ to my friend Dean for 4 or 5 years, and his kids teethed on it until I finished my residency and moved to Atlanta, and I brought the organ back. And then we play here in the basement a little bit once in a while from rock and roll, where I just come down to make noise. So that's kind of where I am with the organ.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Where did you get that, and how old is it?
This one I bought when I was in high school.
Really?
Yeah, and it was in a bar, and by that time they had jukebox, and it was taking up space, so it wasn't too expensive, and then I bought a new speaker here. So let me tell you a little bit about this organ and what makes it special, and what you just don't hear with on the electronic organs, or it has these wheels that turn. When we start it up, you hear it go, and that runs through an electrical field, and then they have these little bars that you pull in and pull out. And when you pull a bar out, the farther you pull it out, the more notes you get. So that's all the way in, and this is all the way out, and there's anyway. So you can then add another sound to that, and you can add a different sound to it. And these are all different sounds that are coming from.
Over there.
I'm sorry. Well, come look if you want to look. So these are the drawbars, and they describe this as being the equivalent of an 8-foot pipe on a pipe organ.
Wow.
And this one is then the 16-foot pipe organ.
Wow.
And then this is the next octave, next octave, next octave. So I'm playing 5 different notes with one finger. And then you can arrange those any way you want to make the sound. The other thing is that
Does that sound like a trumpet when you hear it?
well, see, that's what they're
Oops. What are you doing, pushing the pedals?
Yeah, I didn't think the pedals were working. I didn't see your foot moving on.
all right. I kind of do this. So that's
That's cool. Wow.
so that kind of makes those different combinations of sound. The other thing that's interesting is that if you listen carefully, so I've got a bunch of different drawbars out, and if we push the key down very slowly, those contacts make a different contact with each of those tones. So I'm going to take one note and I'm going to push it down very slowly and listen and see if you can hear those different size pipes come in. So here's nothing. And you hear those different sounds? And you can get several different sounds. And that's what a transistor organ doesn't let you do. So you get just a pure sound from a transistor. But this gives this kind of a real gutsy kind of sound to it. And one of the tricks they do with it, they can get it to waver the sound by turning the organ off and turning it back on rapidly, and that spinning wheel will slow down and speed up, and then you'll hear the pitch change in that, kind of like those shifters that they try to do electronically. So here's the sound. Here's coming back up to speed. So that's fun. They also have a vibrato and a chorus. A vibrato kind of runs the sound up and down just a little bit, and the chorus runs the pitch up and down. The chorus kind of runs the loudness up and down, and you can put those on separate octaves. So here is just a sound, and here is the vibrato. Hear that? And here's the chorus. It's kind of slow. And they give you several different options on how much you want of it. So that came on the original organ. In 1953, they added percussion because when the jazz players were playing, they kind of liked the way this organ is kind of noisy when you hit it and has some little clicks in it. And they added percussion. And so the percussion is that when you hit the first note, when you hit a note, there's a little sharp sound to it. So, oh, I'm not in the right place. Hear that sound like a little bell? That's with no sound. And when you hit that note and hold it, you'll hear that decay. And then if you have something pulled out and bar pulled out so that the note will stay and the decay will go away. And so that is, and that can go a fast decay or a slow decay. And that only happens when all the other notes are off and you add something, you get that kind of a bell. And then the other part of the story is that there's a man named Leslie who invented this speaker tone cabinet. The original Hammonds came through just a regular speaker like this. And this fellow was a sound engineer in California, and he invented these speakers. I should have it opened and turned around. But it has a set of horns that, like you see in a loudspeaker system, that are on a rolling track, or they spin. It has two horns here, and then an 18-inch speaker in the bottom that points down and has a wooden cage that spins with an opening on one side. So the sound comes out and it gets kind of thrown out this way and this way like this. And what that does is give a Doppler effect. Those trains that go ooh as they go by you. When they're coming towards you, the pitch gets higher. When it goes away, the sound goes down. So now you take the sound of the organ and you run it through that spinning speaker, and it gets that wah, 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 wah. And that's when it's running slow. And you have a little switch that makes it run fast. And that's what makes the music sounds so alive out of this organ, is you've got all these moving parts. The bass pedals, people play the bass. Most of the jazz players are using it. That's the sound they're looking for there. Been a while. So I have to say that I don't really sing. Never sang when I was young, and I usually have a drummer and somebody else to play lead parts. So this is a little different for me. So, what sounds have we heard on this organ? So we're kind of familiar with. You got to change your ways, baby. Before I start loving you, you got to change, baby. Every word that I say is true. You got me running like up and down. You got me running like you can't go on. Oh no! Those are, yeah, you guys are great backup singers. We should have rehearsed. And then we heard this sound is kind of classic for The Allman Brothers did, they called Stormy Monday. Oh, Monday, it's just so bad. Called Stormy Monday. A Tuesday is just so bad. Eagle flies on Friday. Saturday I go out and play. Eagle flies on Friday. Saturday I go out to play.
How old is your organ?
Oh, my organ. How old is my organ? So my organ is 50, was made in 1952. And I must have bought it in 69. So it was kind
Isn't
of.
it heavy to move when you were?
They weigh 435 pounds for the organ. And yes,
You used to move?
moving them up and down stairs was, moving them any place is hard, but up and down stairs was really, really tough.
John, when you move it, do you have to recalibrate it every time?
It's all mechanical. It's all, you don't ever have to tune them. This is not like the tube organs that you had to tune. And they weren't being made for moving, but people moved them all the time. And the desirable ones are the ones that have the open bottom, so you can turn and face the audience. The church models, I said, were closed in, and the home models have the speakers underneath the organ that point behind you, so they're designed to be set against a wall. But that's not good for entertaining, because you have your back to everybody and they talk about you. So
Do you play a big church organ?
I've played at one a couple of times, and they have their own charm, because you push a note and you don't hear it for longer than you would like.
Oh, wow.
So when you hit a wrong note, you don't get that feedback until everybody else does at the same time.
You're the last one here.
Yeah. And the feeling that this organ has this kind of a little growl back and forth between the notes are an attempt to make that church organ sound when the different sides of the church should be different temperatures. So pipe organs in the morning sound different than they do in the afternoon when the sun's shining on one side of the church or the other. And this kind of has that same feeling. So I have rambled on. I hope this has been interesting to you. I haven't done this before and haven't organized my thoughts very good. But I'll play just one or two more little pieces for you here. Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping They used to call him the preacher. This was Johnny's there in the pulpit dancing. What he knew, he'd stand up there in the pulpit, horn in his hand, and let that melody take you to the promised land. He used to sing for the ladies, one for the men, and he turned right around and he sang both again. They got to singing and clapping their hands. He had the swingers congregation in the land. They had the swingers congregation in the land.
Running out of the dugout, you know, get out of the field.
Didn't have to wait.
Play that baseball song. Come on.
Oh, I should learn the baseball song. I never learned the baseball song. And then I'll tell you one more story about this organ. That this speaker is. I had the speaker not turned up all the way, and I had the organ turned on soft volume, so it will get louder. So anyway, but there was a guy who had a group, just a drummer and the organ player, Lee Michaels, if you ever get a chance to look at him on YouTube. And somebody went to his concert in Boston, and it was at a theater, and the curtains were closed, and they opened the curtains, and the drummer came out and got up on his little stand, and Lee Michaels came up and sat down, and he's having an organ. And on the stage, there were 12 Leslies, 6 on each side, stacked too high. And this whole theater of people, and he takes that Leslie switch and he starts up the Leslie, and you get this sound going, and the Leslie starts going. And the guy that I knew that was there said, it's like there was something happening in the room, like the room is kind of coming alive. And they sit down to play. I can't quite get this to get in gear. Coming now. It's getting cranky in its old age. But he comes out and he goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Would you be happy? And he said the air just went like this in that Memorex commercial like this. Said the entire audience, their hair just went back like this. He says it was the greatest concert. But Lee Michaels. Anyway, so that's why this is such an interesting instrument and fun instrument, and they haven't been able to my mind, to make that little portable one that will make.
Did they still make them?
The company went out of business. Mr. Hammond died in '73. 4 or 5 years later, the company, in the '70s, they quit the mechanical tone ring. The mechanical tone generator went to transistors, and those organs were not as desirable. They didn't have that same kind of gut feeling. And they went out of business, and then they were bought by a couple of other companies, and now they're making, you can still buy one, but it doesn't have that old-fashioned sound to it. But they sound close. And the new electronic ones, they are working all the little idiosyncrasies of making the noise click, the keys clack, and the growling sounds into the new ones electronically. But it is that kind of real organic feel of people, so that people get when they feel this, play this, and you can get that feeling going in there. Anyway, that's the organ.
Yay.
And sorry it ran so long, but
Oh, no.
it's cool here.
Did you take requests?
Probably not.
Mustang salad.
Oh, Mustang's out.
Mustang down inside. That's old Mustang down. Flat feet on the ground. That's all I remember.
There's a dance floor right there.
Anyway, thank you all for coming,
Thanks for having us.
and stay as long as you're cool. Oh, Marcia has some watermelon.
It is very good.
When I was in high school, I took organ lessons.
Uh-huh.